Okay, this is Ninth Lit, and we are, and all this is posted, so if you don't get it, if you're not here and you watch this, you don't get it, so the whole text of this is on my Caldwell. Well, there's one more slide on him that gives more evidence that he is what we call a Renaissance person, and I think we've talked about that. We talked about it with Canterbury Tales, with the Squire, and how we've lost that. You're being encouraged, or even stronger than that, to specialize in something, rather than be able to try lots of things. Particularly if you're really good at one sport, people will try to get you into that sport and all year long, and there's some value to that, but it limits your ability, because I know some people, I know Neil over there, he could do several things, and maybe you're like that too. You could literally run track and play baseball if you could. That's not really plausible, because they happen at the same time. But you could literally do a sport each season. That's what we used to do. But we don't do that. Can I go on, or? No. All right, I'm going on. All right, so we're going on to more evidence that he's a Renaissance man. Look what he studied. He wasn't narrowly focused in one area. He studied philosophy, theology, astronomy, and classical poetry, and you'll see all of those evidence in Inferno. The thing about reading classical works of literature, the greatest ones, is the text becomes an education in itself. So if you want to learn about a lot of things, read Dante, read Virgil, read Homer, read John Milton. Because as you read those things, you're introduced to things like astronomy, things like science, things like theology, philosophy, history, other literature. Somebody said that the measure of a person's education can be determined if you can understand Milton's Paradise Lost. Because there's so many allusions to other works of literature. And as you read it, if you're able to navigate that and understand that, that tells you how educated you are. And ultimately, that's the bottom line, is how educated do you want to be? It's in a sense up to you after you fulfill the basics of school and everything. Hope you'll keep learning. He was a voracious reader with an invaluable gift of concentration. Yesterday, I was talking about this, and Mr. Walters kind of let that group out. Maybe you were, and that was the DMIT class. They let out 5 minutes early, so we had 5 more minutes. They were standing at the door, kind of making their presence known, and we were doing this at this very point. And I said, Dante, there was an anecdote about Dante, is that he was sitting at an outdoor cafe in Florence, I guess, and reading, and a parade came by with all the noise and all the people. He never looked, somebody watched him. He never looked up from what he was reading or writing. And I said, as we were being distracted by the group outside, I said, how well can you concentrate? How well can you focus on this when you have distractions? I think that's a real key to any success in any sport, in any field of study, in anything. Can you concentrate? And we know the answer to that for a lot of people. They can't. They're just from one thing to another. They can't focus. And really successful people know how to focus. They know how to do lots of things, but when they're doing one thing, they're focused on one thing. I've read this thing about multitasking, and they basically proved that's really not possible. You really don't multitask. You don't do it well. We do lots of things, but we do it poorly. The key is to do one thing at a time and do it well.
Yeah, it's like I've seen that too, where it's like you can multitask, but you're not putting the same equal amount of focus into both things.
Exactly, and it's kind of common sense. We kind of know that instinctively. But he could focus. It's one of the evidence of one of the keys to his success. He could do these things, reminded us of the squire. He could sing, he could write, he could draw, and he got married, and had 4 children. I don't know how that helps us read this, but the more you know about an author, it can't hurt you.
Was his arranged wife in hell?
What's that?
Was his arranged wife in hell too?
Hell? I don't
Like his
know.
teacher?
The reason he puts people in hell, it's not just because he didn't like them. They were guilty of doing something that everybody knew about that would have put them in hell. You know, he had reasons for that. Like, these usually historical people, yeah.
Well, I think it is like important to mention that he married, like, this is off topic of what you were saying,
Yeah.
but like, because if he also wrote like these great books and was studying philosophy and all of these things, that he also had a wife and children to like take care of, and like who he provided for, and like that adds to him being a Renaissance man, because
That's a good
it's
point.
not easy to be married and raise 4 children.
That's a good point. And one thing we've seen about these authors, we said that you can't multitask, which we agree with, but as you said, that doesn't mean you still don't do multiple things. You do them one at a time. And remember Chaucer, he worked at another job and wrote. He had a family and wrote. He was a businessman. He was a soldier, and he had a family, and he wrote. So, they're 24 hours in a day. How well do you use your 24 hours? And we have, so how many days do we have? Nobody knows. The Bible says, number your days. So you want to be involved in it. You don't want to waste your time. I hate that term, wasted. People talk about alcohol and drugs, you want to get wasted. That is like, you can waste a lot of things, but wasting time, you can never get that back. Why would you want to celebrate wasting time? Yeah.
I have a question. So my cousin read this book a long time ago. It's like this girl, like when she sees people, she can see how they died and like the date of their death. So, question for you: would you rather know how you're going to die, or would you rather know the day you're going to die?
Well, see, that's interesting, because that actually relates to Inferno, because Inferno, the point is made over and over that you cannot, maybe it's fun to think about it, but nobody can know the future. It's kind of nice to think, but it's not ever going to happen. Nobody can predict the future, nobody. And even Jesus said, I don't know the day or the time. And that was in his humanness. So people that try to predict the future are in hell. They're called, what are they called here? People that do that, people that try to predict the future in hell, they are twisted. Their bodies are twisted in Dante, and they're always looking behind, because they could never, they were always trying to focus on the future. All right, here we go. Here's Dante the politician. More evidence that he was a multi-gifted person. He could do lots of things. He entered politics and he was exiled in 1301, so he spent about 6 years. He spent about 6 years in politics. And remember, each city was basically a nation. It was a nation-state thing, nation-city thing.
Where's Florence located?
It's in maybe, I think, northern Italy. Okay, so eventually elected to the priorate, which is the chief governing council of the city. And he was a Guelph. You don't know what that means yet. I'm about to tell you, but they had particular things that they believed in. There were 2 political parties at the time, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. And I want you to know the difference. Okay, the Guelphs, we'll start there. That's what Florence was, that's what Dante was. They were the Democratic Party. If you truly understand democracy, remember it's a government for the people, by the people, and I forget what Lincoln said, for the people, by the people. And so it's a country where the people determine the people that govern them. The people do. And usually that's in voting and things. So that's what they believed in. And they were middle class. They weren't the nobility. They were the regular people. And I don't know exactly the date, but it was during this time that they developed what we call a middle class. Because prior to that, there were the really rich and there were the really poor. And you know, in England, you had different status levels of rich. You could be a duke, you could be a count, you could be and so forth. But there were very few middle class. Now you've got getting a growing middle class. They opposed the power of the emperor, but they supported the pope. So there are four things there: democratic, middle class, oppose emperor, support pope. Four
Who was
things.
an emperor?
What?
I did not know there was an emperor.
Yeah, there's a Holy Roman Emperor. Have you studied that yet?
Oh.
You know, there was this development, you know, now toward these more, I guess, toward nations and toward secular political power instead of sacred religious power. All right, that's the Guelphs, the four things. The Ghibellines, you take all that and you kind of flip it. You know, like in our country, Democrats and Republicans, it clearly defined. What one group believes, the other group opposes, and vice versa. I'm glad we have two parties. Otherwise, it would be just one party. Two parties work in our country. But the Ghibellines were aristocratic, not democratic or middle class. They were aristocratic. They supported the emperor and opposed the pope. So really, three things. But they oppose whatever the Gulfs are for and vice versa. That's all you need to know about them, but I do want you to know that. And he was a Guelph, and Florence was a Guelph city, and he was a politician. You don't think of poets being politicians. And I hope this year you're getting to see, I don't know, that poetry is not necessarily, I want to use the word feminine. You know, you think of girls like poetry, guys not. Well, we haven't read a woman poet, unfortunately, but we haven't read one yet this year. Who's writing the poetry? Men are, and then, so men can like poetry too. Women write poetry, women like, and they write it and they like it. So do men. It's not a stereotype like that. But he's a politician, he's a soldier, he's a businessman, and he's a poet. All right, let me move on.
We got one of the last one.
Make sure you do note the difference between those two political parties.
Almost done.
You know what would, Taylor, listen up. It would be helpful to me, if I were doing it, I didn't do it here, but you could do it, is to, sorry. You bullet pointing them. I like to do that. And some of you who know how to take notes well, instead of just bunching it all together, I bullet pointed it here, but then within each group, you could kind of make an outline. All right, the Guelphs, I told you about this yesterday, split into two parties known as the whites and the blacks. The whites, the name came from one of the family members, Bianca or whatever, I hate to say Blanche, that sounds so southern, but whatever it is, that means white, so they were the white party. The blacks are nary, to show opposition to the whites, it'd be like why do we choose red and blue? You know, I mean, what the Republicans are the red party, Democrats are the blue party. I don't know exactly who made that distinction, but that's the same principle. And they represented two feuding families. So this was really a feud between two families within the Guelph party, the whites and the blacks. Dante was of the white family, or the white party, and in 1301 he was exiled for life from Florence for political reasons. He died in 1321. So you can see he lived 20 years after his exile, his beloved city. I've often wondered, well, that's not so bad. You just moved to another city. But this is your home, and you're not allowed to go back to your home. People can leave the home and visit you, but you're not allowed to go there. It's a pretty strenuous punishment.
Yeah, like what did he do?
I don't know. His political views it's canceling, like we see today, you know, if you have the wrong views, you're canceled, and so that's what they did to him, so they canceled him, they exiled him.
So compared to everyone else, cause I feel like I've heard you say a lot, like, these people are in hell because like it was widely known of their like sin, while like Dante was exiled and that was like widely known. So like, what do you?
Well, he's writing the book.
Well, exactly,
So he's
but
not-
like, I'm just like, just kind of bouncing off.
We have to go back to why is anybody in hell? They're in hell not because they sin. We all sin, even as believers. Everybody sins. Are you saved? And that's the difference. And so, you know, we don't know that unless somebody comes, I'm not saying, I don't believe. If they say it, we'll take their word for it. But if they say they're saved, we take their word for that too. However, you can look at people and look at their fruit, as Jesus said, and make some judgments about that. But none of us are condemning someone to hell. What Dante does here, in order to illustrate the sins in hell, I hope you come away from reading this book, not so much what are the punishments in hell, because those are, who knows? I mean, those are also imaginary. That's not what this book is really about. It's not the punishments so much as it is the sins. What are these sins like? As you read it, you're gonna see, like we mentioned, foretelling the future. Why is that a sin? And so this book kind of looks at that, why you don't want to do that, and what's wrong with that. What he does is he selects people from history. He selects even fictional literary characters like Achilles. Probably didn't really exist, but he's in one of these circles. Several popes who did exist are in these circles. So he would take people and use them because of what people knew about them as examples. That's a great question. Remember, he remained exiled for the rest of his life, which was only 20 more years, and he lived in various cities. He ended up being buried in Ravenna, and after he's dead, of course, and famous, they want him back. The Florentines want him back because he's famous. But as far as I know, according to this, he's still in Ravenna. His remains are. So it's kind of, he had the last laugh. You want me now, and you can't have me. All right, so he died at age 56. That's how old Shakespeare lived. That's you know, we haven't mentioned the plague. I think you've studied it. Have you studied it?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, you'll see how devastating that was, and
That's how you get written on the cozy like the song.
it's pretty good to live that long.
Listen, this one.
All right, can I go on, Catherine?
Lord.
Catherine?
No.
I'm ready to go. Let's get to it. All this is interesting, but I'm mostly interested in the book. So we're going to be moving to what you're going to be reading, and hopefully we can start that.
Wait, do we have to do more?
Do more what? Yeah,
So you think we'll get through half
I
of
need
this?
another sheet.
that's the plan. We have about a month, a good month. That's what, 20 classes. So about 20 classes, I think we can do it.
Okay.
And the more you read it, the slower you read it. That's the funny. You read it fast because you don't really, you're just going through. But as you start understanding and liking it, you slow down, and there's more and more and more. So the fifth and sixth time, you're reading it even slower because you're finding, wow, this is interesting. I didn't see this before. That's why you can study this for the rest of your life.
How many times have you read this book?
Too many times.
Not too many. I wouldn't say that. I didn't start teaching it when I was first here. I've been here 17 years, so at least 10 or 12, maybe longer. Say 12, 3 times a year. That's 36 times for half of it, because we rarely get past half of it. First couple of years we read all of it. I think I've read all of it once or twice, but the rest of it, as crazy as that sounds, how many times have you read it? 36 times? Like you're crazy. You really? Yeah, because you read it 3 times a day.
Are you able to pick like the books that you read for the year for freshmen? Like,
No.
or is this-
We have a list that is already approved, and this is just on the list, which I
Who
love.
approves the books?
The school board.
The school board.
Probably.
After his death, hold on. Where?
Where are you? The
I want the
guilt
very
eventually
last words,
split.
Mr. Powell, please spare me.
Lord.
The guilt eventually
That's what my head says when I read.
split. I know,
Oh.
get
God.
ready. So tired.
My hand hurts.
Last word is them.
Yeah, I did it.
All right. Works by Dante. I always like you to know the name of another work, so that you know that this guy or these people wrote more than the Italian and the English. So he wrote something called The Banquet. It's his philosophy, 1308. Notice again, even his writing reflects kind of a Renaissance view of many things. Philosophy, politics, and we'll just say theology, although we know that it's not really theology, based on theology. So philosophy, politics, and theology. 3 different books on 3 different subjects, and all of our poetry. Keep that in mind. We're talking about the novel has not been invented. So long works of fiction in prose didn't develop for 400 more years. Literature has been around from the beginning. The book of Psalms is poetry. Book of Proverbs is poetry. So what we think of as the novel is really, that's why novelists are never listed in the greatest writers ever, because they're newbies, they're new guys. Only 300 years, as opposed to all of human history for literature. It's sometimes, I don't know, it's called the commedia, the comedy. We call it the Divine Comedy. I don't know exactly what the Italian would be, if this is the complete, but we know it as, and it was 1314. These are publishing dates.
Do we have any books from before Jesus? Other than the Bible? I mean,
Well, the whole Old Testament is before Jesus.
no, other than the Bible. Probably.
Yeah, I don't know, that's a great
Probably not like a whole
question.
cop.
Like, what would be the first recorded words ever written anywhere?
Yeah, they have like
Oh,
the
the cities.
Yes.
all the.
Who was like?
So if the Divine Comedy, did he write all 3 of them?
Yeah.
Like, just, consecutively,
Yeah.
just kind of.
And when he published it, he published the whole thing at
Okay,
once.
in 1314.
Right.
Okay.
You know, one thing we haven't mentioned is the translator. The translator is Dorothy Sayers. She translated Roland. And Dorothy Sayers is, she would probably be embarrassed if she were living to know that. She's referred to as the founder of modern classical education. That's not what she saw herself as at all. But I like her because there's that classical connection. And I love this translation. We've read others. I love the notes and I love the diagrams. I need all the help I can get, and you do too. So there's lots of notes, there's plenty of diagrams that help us. All right, so let's continue by going on.
She was really accomplished.
Yes, she was a friend of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she graduated with first-class honors in French from Somerville College, Oxford, in 1950.
British.
Oh,
That's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much. My parents were very accomplished and smart.
wow.
All right, so here we go, making slow progress, but now we're talking about the book itself. This is the fun part.
Wait, that wasn't.
It is the first 3 parts of the Divine Comedy, the Inferno is. Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise. Those are the three parts. All are written in Italian. That's not a small point. I want you to know that. It's not Latin. It's the first major work written in Italian, not Latin. And he was writing in Italian because Italian is the vernacular. It's the language people spoke. While you're writing that, I gotta tell you, I can't believe this. Some educators are advocating getting away from books and going just to visuals, like, or auditory. Yes, I heard it on a report. They're saying we need to get away from books, and it's absurd because
I don't know about that.
Some
it's
people like do better if you physically have a copy. Like for me, I get really distracted with audiobooks, so So if it was like suddenly switched, like people that are more like visual learners would like really struggle.
Yeah, and audiobooks are, what are they? They are books.
But you're
being
not
read.
actually reading it, somebody's reading it.
Yeah, but they're still a book, so where would you get rid of the books? How would you ever know any of this?
We're gonna become like jelly one day.
They're probably just gonna keep it in like the library or something.
Be the reader in your circle of friends, you know, be an influence on them. First for Christ, but also, if you're a Christian, you're gonna be reading the Bible. All right, he wrote this book at the lowest point of his life. That's a sermon right there, man. Some of the greatest writers and the greatest books ever written were written at the lowest points of their lives. John Milton was blind when he wrote Paradise Lost. Beethoven was going deaf when he wrote many of his great symphonies. Handel was absolutely abjectly poor, I think, when he wrote the Messiah. And Dante, was exiled when he wrote the Divine Comedy. So when bad things happen, you know, the first thing you ought to do is think about
Somebody.
Henry V. I know we didn't memorize it, but he says, you know, the fewer men, the greater share of glory. Remember, he turns something bad into something good. He turns a negative into a positive. So when things are going really bad for you, there should be this kind of thing in your head, man, something good is about to happen. Because you're at your best when things are at their worst often.
Yeah.
And so Dante, that's kind of what his life tells us. Secondly, Inferno tells the story of Dante. Dante's the writer, Dante's the main character. Journey through hell that begins, guess how many days the story takes place? What's
7.
his favorite number?
3.
3 days. Good Friday and ends on Easter Sunday. 3 days.
So all this happens for Inferno in 3 days, or
Yes,
all?
Inferno.
So
3
then
days.
how long did it take for him, so it's like three for purgatory and?
I don't remember the other two, but we're talking about Inferno right now. It's 3 days from Good Friday to Easter Sunday. In the year 1300. So he nails down a specific year. Notice what's significant about the year 1300. See if any
It
of
has
you
a
are
3
paying.
in it.
Well, it does, but what else? From the base of his life, what I just tell you?
New
He
millennium.
got exiled.
1 year later. So he wrote this, listen to me, he wrote this during his exile, which began in 1301. But he sets the story the year before his exile in
When he's still
1300.
there.
So just keep that in mind, that's going to play a kind of a role in some of the, because when he goes through hell, people tell him, who know him, about the exile. They're foreshadowing his exile to him, which in the story hasn't happened yet, but of course when he wrote it, he had. This is a Christian allegory. I hope you can understand allegory. It requires you to think two things at one time. It requires you to hold two truths in your head at the same time. And those two truths are, before I read this, well, let me read it because it does say here, the interpretation of experience by means of images. I don't particularly like that. I want you to write it down. That might help some of you. What helps me is this part. Or a story that can be interpreted at two different levels, literal and figurative. So when you read an allegory, you know this book you read this summer is an allegory, Pilgrim's Progress. You have to keep two things in mind at the same time. What's literally happening? He's going down into hell. He sees monsters. That's literally what's happening in the story. But what does it mean, figuratively? You have to keep both of them in your mind at the same time, and that's hard for some people. We got 1 more minute here, so write this down. We are close, but we're not there yet. So you're in forum from 9 to quarter to 10, then you're in your elective. So at the end of your elective at 10:30, you'll have your pictures.
Yes, I do.
Me too.